So there's this guy named Sam.
Someone like me.
And I think he does this thing called art.
The boobas.
With over 1 million subscribers on YouTube and over 2 million followers on Instagram, his style is being studied by thousands of people worldwide.
Ooh, shadow.
Over the months, I have been referencing his art while I draw. And when I say referencing it, I don't mean just pulling up his artwork and replicating it. I mean sitting down and dissecting the way he draws, the decisions he makes, and the overall style that he has developed over the years. I think the best way to find your own individual style is by studying the styles of your favorite artists. And Sam, he is the favorite artist of many. And so I hope I can help you guys, and let's get right into it. Even though his proportions are exaggerated, they are still true to reality. So one thing that defines his style is really large eye sockets. I mean, like, look at this eye socket compared to this one. With that being said, something I have observed, and I'd really like to emphasize the word observed, because everything in this video is simply an observation that I've made. But something I've observed is that the eyeball, once covered by the lids, will appear to only take up half the space of the socket. In Sam's art, he stays true to this ratio. Despite the socket being so exaggerated, his eyes typically only take up half the space of that large eye socket. This ratio proves to be true in real life references as well. Like any face, there's an eye width apart of the eyes. You'll notice the corner of the eye should align with the wings of the nose. This is true with any face, real, cartoon, or not. So one of the things that Sam loves to do in his art is create textures, and while one might assume that he just places these randomly, he does not. So he likes to use cross-hatching, where dark meets light as a transition. And he's not the only person to do this. It's actually very common in comic art, because in comic art you have to get across the idea of shading while using a very, flat color palette. So here I kind of pointed out where the form is showing, they use lines. By using these lines, they are showing the form of which the light is wrapping around. When you shade, there are two types of shadows: form shadows and cast shadows. When shading form shadows, unless it's a square, it is going to be a smooth gradation following the shape of the form. And our bodies are made up of a ton of cylinder and sphere-like shapes, so there's going to be a lot of smooth form shadows going on. The sharp shadows that you see are cast shadows, which is when something that protrudes from the face, like the nose for example, blocks light, thus casting a shadow. So I went off on a little tangent there about form and shading, but to get back to what I was talking about, Sam likes to use textures where the shadow and the light meet. Here on her neck, it is very subtle, but there is a stroke of texture right between the light and the dark. In this portrait, the face is primarily in shadow, and there is a very strong light coming from the left. Sam uses a stroke of texture to transition the light to the dark. Right here on her shoulder, light to dark, and then there's the transition of the crosshatch. On the shirt, dark to light, there's the transition of the crosshatch. The second thing that I've observed from his style is high contrast. Sam very strategically sets up his lighting to make sure that the character always stands out from the scene. High contrast is formed when something dark is up against something bright. In order to keep this girl's dark outfit and hair from blending into what would otherwise be a dark background, he uses a light cloud of mist or fog behind her, which then creates high contrast and separates her from the background. This portrait has some very strong lighting hitting the character from the left, and in order to combat the issue of her hair otherwise blending in with the background, he plops in a spot of light just behind the dark parts of her hair. This piece uses rim lighting to separate the character from the background, which can be a very aesthetic and simple way to pull your character forward, and he uses this technique a lot in his artwork. The third technique that Sam does that I noticed was combining soft and hard shadows, which again gives it very good contrast. So right here we have a very sharp shadow, a very sharp shadow, a very sharp shadow, and these are all cast shadows, and he likes to combine these with softer shadows. For example, the shading on her face is very soft and delicate compared to the very sharp cast shadows that are surrounding it. When you have a painting full of sharpness and there's one area that is very soft, our eyes are going to go to that soft area because it's different. And you can do it the other way around too, having a very soft painting and then having the face be very sharp. In this piece, he does the same treatment. There is very sharp lighting on her very soft face. Sam loves to use lighting to direct the viewer's eyes to the main focus of his piece. You don't want to just place your lighting willy-nilly. You want to be deliberate on where it is, because naturally our eyes will be drawn to what's being lit. And so here I would like to talk about his proportions and how they're very exaggerated but are still grounded in realism. So one of the first things I noticed is he makes his necks very long and skinny. As you can see here, her neck is, very thick. Our necks hold up our head. They have muscle, bone, meat all up in there. It's gonna be thick, especially at this angle. But in his artwork, he likes to slim them down. And this one too, the neck is not as small as you think it is, but he likes to make them more slim. Next is raised and tipped noses. Compared to the reference, he likes to make his noses a little more upturned and petite. I believe this gives the face and the nose a little bit more, maybe like energy, personality. That's just something I noticed with his profile photos. When it comes to like the head-ons, it's typically a very like triangular shape like this. It reminds me of a cat actually. Little kitten noses. Sometimes all I do with the nose, pretend that these are like, eyes. Sometimes all I do for the nose is like this, like bam. You can tell that's a nose, and you can almost kind of tell that it's like a Sam style nose. The next thing I noticed is sharp hair shapes. One of the reasons he probably keeps the hair so sharp is because the face is usually very softly rendered and it creates a very nice contrast. So you'll notice here it's very smooth, and then in the hair you can see all these very sharp shapes. The highlight colors come in very sharp. The hair itself is very sharp. Right here it kind of comes to a point, here it comes to the point. Here's a sharp shape. In this curly hair you can really see it. It's some pretty sharp highlights going on here. And this just gives the hair a lot of personality. And it's very, like I said before, it's really good contrast to more softer shading that's going on. In the front view of the nose, a lot of the times the bridges of the nose, like right here, usually he does not define that. Another thing I observed is that he likes to add in blue ambient light, which comes from the blueness of the sky appearing softly on the face. Even in scenes where the character is indoors, he still likes to add this in. Against the warm tones of the face, it adds a really satisfying pop of color. When it comes to the cheeks of his characters, they all seem to be more orangey. I color picked the cheeks from every single example here, and they all fall into the upper right corner of the saturation, and they all hue more towards orange. What I think is really interesting is that it doesn't even necessarily matter that they are all in different environments. They all have the same orangey color. He likes to paint the eyelashes very thick and not individually, right? You can create this big shape and just have a couple strands that come off. And then our brains do the rest, and they just fill in the information for us. Hard shadows next to soft shadows can create a very nice contrast. Like here, for example, it's very sharp, but then the neck is very gradual. Sam, I believe, likes to think in terms of shapes. This right here is the front plane of the face, and that's what defines it as being brighter than this side plane, which is away from the sun. And if you break that down into shapes or planes, it kind of just becomes easier to shade, easier to understand, easier to make look real. When painting his faces, I noticed most all of his skin tones start around this value and saturation on the color square. Over and over, I noticed the color sitting up here at the top of the square and around the middle point. And that is like the midtones of his faces. I went ahead and color picked like all the lips because I can like never color lips correctly to make them look this juicy. So I color picked them, and almost in each and every one of these it was the same. It was like right here on the color square. This one too, it's like right there. This one right here, the lips, it's like always right here in the reds. And when it comes to the shadows of the lips, the color typically just drops straight down in darkness around the halfway point and can sometimes hue a little redder. Sometimes his lips are a little bit more orange instead of red, but it's still always in this kind of range right here. What I noticed about his shadows, and this totally depends on your lighting situation, but a lot of the times the skin tone is right here and his shadows will come down to like here, and then the hue will change. So for example, this is the shadow of the face. It came down and then it got more red. On this piece, it's almost exactly the same. This is the cheek color here, and for the shadow, you can tell it just came right down, straight down, bloop, and then he hued it a little bit more red. Please keep in mind this is not true for all of his pieces, it's just something I saw reoccurring in multiple of his pieces. So after nearly a full 15 minutes, that's pretty much everything I have to say. And for anyone interested in this file, it will be in the description below as a JPEG, as well as a link to Sam's Instagram. If you want to know more about how Sam draws, I'd highly recommend deep diving into his older YouTube videos where he very specifically lays out how he draws. I didn't want to just reiterate things he has said or videos he has made himself already, but rather give you guys my own personal observations of his style. If this video has helped you out in any way, please consider liking and subscribing. I plan to do more content like this because taking time to study art actually really helps me as much as it might help you guys as well. Here is the final piece that I ended up creating after studying Sam's work, and that's pretty much all I got. Thank you guys for getting this far into the video, and until next time, peace.